Metroidvania, Doom clone, God of War ripoff. Every once in a while, a video game comes about that is so impactful, so consequential, so revolutionary, that every game like it that follows is compared to it the way you compare yourself to everybody else in the gym locker room. Fortunately for From Software, they chose a naming convention that allowed them to acknowledge Demon Souls without having to be beholden to it, as Dark Souls became the de facto progenitor of the genre now called Souls-like. Well, Soulsborne as it was initially coined, but since Sony and FromSoft have neglected to rescue Bloodborne from its Shanghai on the Isle of PS4, the Born is now increasingly left off. I guess it's fortunate for From that theirs isn't a Nintendo to Konami relationship like Metroidvania, and they're only sharing the auspices of the name with themselves. Now, normally, this is the point of the video where I'd talk about cultural impact, the game's reception at launch, and dive into Metacritic scores and Steam review aggregations, but I don't want to waste your time or mine on a conclusion that's so foregone that elaborating on it any further is almost as redundant as the fact that I'm making this video at all. Truth be told, when I first conceptualized this series, this was the first game I decided I wanted to play. There were numerous reasons for this, but at the core, as someone who has always loved overcoming challenging video games, it felt like required reading that I had skipped, like all the historical boomer fiction I blew off in my college lit class to play video games instead. Sure, the original reason I skipped it was that it was a PlayStation exclusive and game consoles are expensive, and I already had a 30+K gamer score on the Xbox, but as the years passed and Dark Souls was ported to almost half as many platforms as Skyrim, that excuse ran out of stamina. In time, it fell into a category like Bethesda's aforementioned magnum opus and other cultural phenomena like Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad, where the sheer rabidity of its fanbase became off-putting enough on its own that it kept me from taking advantage of the game's increased accessibility. Still, in the back of my mind, I always wondered, am I strong enough as a gamer and hard game connoisseur to best the namesake of the genre known for being unforgivingly punishing? Long and short, yeah. 80 hours later, turns out I am. Though it would taste a lie to say that I didn't have doubts in the beginning. After a character creation that told me very little about what any of the choices I was making actually meant, wherein I called upon some new player advice I had absorbed through over a decade of cultural osmosis, and chose a class whose name I forgot, but specialized in single-handed weapons and shields, I was shunted into an opening cinematic that, without rewatching, I will now attempt to recount. Long ago, there was a dude named Gwen. The world sucked pretty hard, so Gwen made friends with a smooth dragon, a compost heap, ring wraith cosplayers, and some sticks. Together, they used fire to somehow make the world suck less, though it still sucks pretty hard. And now, people are undead, but some are less undead than others and are basically cool. Like you. I think I nailed it. It's enough explanation to get you moving your whole undead ass out of Undead Asylum. Everything is undead around these parts. The game introduces itself to you in rather spectacular fashion, as once you escape your cell and stumble into your first boss battle with the Asylum Demon, you most likely get smeared across the battlefield in 10 seconds flat. It's a pattern the game continues to reinforce even after enacting your vengeance upon your girthy warden. Find a new bad guy, engage carefully, die, learn what you did wrong, overcome. It really becomes the core of the experience. At least mostly. You see, it's not long before you reach the closest thing to home that exists in this light-forsaken world in Firelink Shrine, and you're told to ring a couple bells nearby for reasons that I remember. Who said I didn't remember? Why were we supposed to ring the bells? I paid attention. It was upon reaching the first bell that I learned how the game really works. That bell was the one located on top of Undead Parish, and I arrived to find it guarded by a gargoyle. We did battle. It went pretty well. Then, to my great surprise, one goyle became two, and I wound up barbecued. About an hour of throwing myself against them like 90s cartoon Will Riker, I ended up having to walk away from the game for fear of punching my monitor in frustration. Clearly, I eventually overcame it, but it was not by getting good, as the Souls enthusiasts would say. It was, in fact, by grinding up Souls and Titanite and leveling up myself and my weapon. About 20 minutes of grind, and I returned to the roof of the parish and skipped through the goyles like a field of posies. Ding dong, look who done got good. It was actually a bit of a disappointment. You see, I, like most people who were on the internet when this game came out, saw all the litany of Git Good memes flying around the world and assumed that every challenge in the game would need overcome via mechanical mastery. So discovering that the game was really a fairly standard exercise of me squishy, too weak, stab little dudes till biceps get big, now me turgid big strong, was kind of a letdown. Turns out Git Good could more accurately be translated to get grinding. Now, I'm well aware of the thriving community of Souls players who make a career out of tackling the games wearing nothing but a Zweihander and a smile, but I think that they're the exception that proves the rule. The fact that Let Me Solo Her has made such a name out of that shtick shows just how much of an anomaly they are amongst the community. Regardless, I settled into the loop and the game finally started to click. Without giving too much away, taking the time to grind up souls and mats was a strat so effective it carried me through even the final boss. I think I ended up getting over how cheap it felt because of how obtuse the game is. You see, your character screen comes with a list of stats and attributes that would make a D&D player blush, and the game stubbornly refuses to explain even a one of them. It was intimidating at first, but I came to appreciate how it encouraged experimentation and discovery of the game's systems. Each new victory, finding a combo of weapons and armor that worked well, or learning I needed a minimum strength of 20 to one-hand a weapon and keep my shield, deepened my understanding of how the game was built, guiding my progression in the natural directions it was supposed to go and organically leading me to the next victory. Like most things about the game, I came to regard it as a feature rather than a bug. Speaking of the game's features, one thing I've heard a lot about throughout its life is its immaculate level design, and by Solare's bronzed perineum do I wholeheartedly agree. You see, after I overcame the aforementioned Keith David wannabes, I tried to progress through the graveyard adjacent to Firelink Shrine and quickly learned that this is the one medieval fantasy game where skeletons aren't pushovers. Following that, I headed down to New Londo and was voraciously instructed in the workings of ghostly incorporeality. Downtrodden by my failures, I returned to Undead Burg to take out my frustrations on the piddly hollows still in residence, and found more than I bargained for. Stumbling back across a Black Knight from whom I had previously very bravely fled, I engaged him and, to my surprise, emerged victorious. Past him, a whole new area of Undead Burg opened up, including a new way back to Firelink, a boss battle with Satan's Obedience School, and a previously inaccessible entrance to the depths below the Burg, and I finally understood the brilliance of the game's level design. The path to the depths being guarded by an enemy that I couldn't overcome at the point when I'd first met it meant I didn't stumble away from where I was supposed to be too soon. The graveyard and New Londo being too hardcore for my teensy undead drove me back to Undead Burg, and because of that I found the depths, killed a bunch of rats, also in true medieval fantasy RPG fashion, fought a poop dragon, and made it to Blightdown to get my second bell. By using difficulty gates, I was herded back to re-explore the previous areas and find all new avenues of progress, a pattern that the game maintained all through my 80-odd hours. For me, what initially came across as obtuseness, I ended up regarding as a masterclass in implicit tutorialization. Quite a lot of praise I just gave this game, huh? Well, as my wife likes to constantly remind me, just because you love something doesn't mean it's without its frustrations. One thing I was really looking forward to was the boss battles. I'd heard a lot about them, and as a, let's say, enthusiastic Zelda fan, a good boss fight is something that gets me sprung. A lot of the boss battles were great, especially early on. As I progressed though, the balance began to shift, with certain of the later game bosses, like the aforementioned Compost Pile and Poop Dragon, breezed by on my first try no problem. Others, like the Twigs, took a fair few deaths to pick my way through, but the game's imbalance was perhaps best illustrated by the Duke's Archive and the Smooth Dragon in residence. So, as the experience was obviously intended, I charged my way up the tower with relative ease and blasted into Seif's chamber ready to scrap, and was immediately turned into crystallized paste. My following trek through the Duke's Archives was several hours of getting bitch-slapped by a library full of mixed ranged and melee attackers, including spellcasters and archers, of whom one always seemed to know when I was lowering my guard to attack. I died so many times that I ended up having to, for one of the few times throughout my playthrough, walk away so I didn't frisbee my laptop out of my car window on the freeway. When I eventually returned to it and overcame the library, I took my turns getting pummeled by the gem giants in the courtyard, tumbling into the yawning abyss below the invisible bridges of the crystal caves, and getting eaten by giant oysters full of murder pearls. All of these challenges were methodically taken apart over hours of frustration, and finally getting to the slickered worm, and I beat him in 2 tries. And on the second successful try, I didn't actually engage with any of the challenges between the bonfire and him, just sprinted past them like a college streaker running from drunken frat pledges. That actually became the prevailing tactic for a lot of such challenges. Take the giant's grave. Fighting through all the giant skeletons in the pitch black without knowing where I was going meant I was alternating between getting my face stomped in, tumbling into deep dark death, and having my face bitten off by those insanely effective, ridiculously aggro, giant skeleton dog gimp things. Finally, I got a skull lantern, found the bonfires, and made it to the Hot Topic Lord, but each time I found a bonfire, just like with the archive, I would just figure out how to sprint past the bad guys and get back to where I was. There was, in fact, almost no challenge in the game that couldn't be sprinted past outside of the boss battles, and I bet if I looked at speedruns, there are ways to sprint past them too. I am fully aware that a lot of people will pop in this point and shout, skill gap, or whatever way they've found to try and more cleverly say, get good. But I'd put dollars down that they started out playing Sprint Souls instead of Dark Souls just like me, and yes, I think it's one of this game's weaknesses. I shouldn't want to just run past enemies in the game for want of avoiding tedium, but maybe that's something that's better in the later games. But it feels like a failure of the game that I got to the point where I didn't want to engage with it on its terms anymore. And even then, there's a catharsis to it. Learning how to sprint through the library, the crystal caves, and the giant's grave was a skill in itself. There's an argument that that's part of the intended experience, and that the challenge is in surviving these gauntlets long enough to learn how to blast through them like Sonic the Undead Hog. Hell, by that point in the game, I had even stopped relying on shield blocks or dodge rolls so much, favoring instead tiptoeing daintily in circles around mofos and whacking them on the bums. So, maybe, just maybe, you're supposed to only engage with these systems long enough to learn how to not need them. Perhaps that is what Git Gud actually meant all along. In the end, the Lord of Cinder fell, the fire was linked, the journey of Dum Dum the Undead came to a close, and my first playthrough of Dark Souls concluded successfully. Now that I've crossed this off my list, what's the verdict? Well, let's address one lingering thread. You may have noticed that up until now, I didn't mention one of the game's most infamous features, Blighttown. The reason for that is that I can't judge it fairly. You see, this game did expose one particular weakness of my chosen video series format in that Dark Souls has been out for quite a few years now, and just like I know that pizzas don't go on roofs, many people had to change careers after having their knees compromised by wooden projectiles, and some PA probably got fired because of a Starbucks cup, I knew about Blighttown. I didn't know specifically why it was regarded as a fresh plate of chicken fried ass, but I did know of its reputation. So I was on extra guard as I plunged through it. As soon as I realized poisoning was a major concern, I returned to the sewer merchant to stock up on purple moss and relied on the reach of my trusty halberd to mitigate the threat of plummeting to my doom, which I have a sneaking suspicion was my single leading cause of death in this game. All told, the simple fact that I was aware of Blighttown's reputation meant I was a bit more prepared for it than I would have been, so probably had an easier time than I otherwise would have. Sort of like knowing to avoid the Circle K on C Street after dark. And now is a great time to level my biggest criticism against the game, such as it is. I found I couldn't give it my whole undivided attention all the time. Whenever I was exploring an area or tackling a boss battle for the first time, sure, I would engage with rapt enthusiasm, as is usually the case with first times. But as I would fall into the loop of repetition and learning to overcome obstacles, I often found myself popping into a podcast or an audiobook in order to keep the process from getting too monotonous, because turns out there's a fine line between practicing repetition to perfection and tedium that will drive you mad, and I genuinely don't know if I would have stuck with this game all the way through otherwise. Probably because, as my wife will attest, I am quite stubborn when I make up my mind to do something, but at least with a video game, she can still use the kitchen while I figure out how to finish what I started. To sum up my feelings succinctly, even as I sit here on the toilet at work writing this, I'm thinking about starting a new Game Plus Catharsis run of the game to go bully all the dudes what bullied me when I was small and frail, and really, there are a few games in my time that I've rolled credits on and immediately wanted to start again. As someone who grew up loving Zelda games, a series with which Dark Souls seems to share a fair bit of DNA, and as someone who loves challenging video games, it hit me in a way few games do. Had I owned a PlayStation in 2011, there's a great chance I would have been one of the insufferable pricks sharing Git Gud memes on Facebook just like the rest of the fan base. As it stands, I'm quite eager to jump into Dark Souls 2, but I'm planning on playing a few shorter games to bank for future videos just so it's not 3 months until the next Latent Regard first. Dark Souls wound up being 100% my jam, complaints and all. I kind of suspected it would be, given how I won't shut up about how much I loved Jedi Fallen Order, and it absolutely was a student of the school of Miyazaki. And I guess, in the end, sometimes there is something to a fanbase's off-puttingly cultish loyalty to a franchise. But, you know, don't tell the Star Wars fandom that.